The Vethkai had watched the stars for 10,000 generations, and in all that time, they had never stopped believing that salvation would come from above. Their world was beautiful in ways that most species could never understand, with twin purple suns that painted the sky in shades of violet and gold, and forests that sang when the wind moved through them, and oceans so clear you could see the bottom even in the deepest places. The Vethkai themselves were gentle creatures, standing about 2 meters tall with scaled skin that shifted colors based on their emotions, 4 arms that could perform incredible feats of craftsmanship, and large dark eyes that saw perfectly in both light and shadow. They had built temples to the sky gods, the beings they called the Kelvoran, which meant those who descend in their ancient tongue. Vethkai child grew up hearing the stories, tales of powerful beings who would fall from the heavens like shooting stars when the world needed them most. Heroes wrapped in fire and light who would protect the innocent and destroy evil. For most of their history, these were just stories, beautiful myths painted on temple walls and sung during festivals, but never truly believed by anyone except the very young and the very old. Then the Dominion arrived, and everything changed. The Dominion was an empire that stretched across 100 star systems, ruled by a species called the Krethven, who had evolved on a world of constant warfare and had decided that the entire galaxy existed for their benefit. They came to Vethkai, prime in ships that blotted out the twin suns, massive vessels of black metal that hung in the sky like judgment itself. And they announced their demands through speakers that made the air itself shake. The Vethkai would submit, the Dominion said, and they would provide workers for Dominion mines and factories. And they would give up half of their resources every year, and in exchange, the Dominion would allow them to continue existing. They, Vethkai, had never developed weapons beyond simple hunting tools because they had never needed them. And their leaders looked at the warships overhead and knew they had no choice. For 3 years, they served the Dominion, and with each passing season, the demands grew worse. The Dominion took their strongest young people for labor camps on distant worlds, and they stripped the singing forests for lumber, and they poisoned the clear oceans with mining waste. And they laughed at the Vethkai priests who begged them to stop. High Priestess Yaveth was the spiritual leader of her people, an old female with scales that had faded to silver with age. And she had watched her world die slowly for 3 years, while praying to gods who never answered. She stood now on the highest point of the Temple of Descending Light, the most sacred place on all of Vethkai Prime, and below her, the capital city was burning. The Dominion had decided that the Vethkai were not working hard enough, and so they had sent gunships to teach them a lesson. And those gunships were now reducing ancient buildings to rubble and setting fire to homes, where families huddled in Toror Yaveth could hear the screams even from this height. And she could smell the smoke, and she could feel her hearts breaking inside her chest because there was nothing she could do. She raised all 4 of her arms toward the darkening sky, toward the stars that were just becoming visible as the sun set, and she began to recite the ancient words that every priest knew by heart. "Hear us, Kelvoran," she said, her voice cracking with grief. "We who have waited so long, we who have kept faith through the darkness, we beg you now to descend, for we cannot save ourselves." The words felt hollow in her mouth, because she had said them 1,000 times before, and nothing had ever happened. And she knew that nothing would happen now. And soon the Dominion gunships would come for the temple too. She closed her eyes and prepared to die. That was when the sky split open. Yaveth heard it before she saw it. A sound like thunder, but sharper, more focused, and when she opened her eyes, she saw a streak of fire cutting through the clouds above her. It was not a Dominion weapon because she knew the signature of their guns by now. And it was not a meteor because it moved with purpose, changing direction slightly as it fell. And it was not anything she had ever seen before. The burning object passed directly over the temple. close enough that she could feel its heat on her scales. And it continued toward the hills beyond the burning city. And then it struck the ground with an impact that shook the entire mountain for a long moment. Everything was silent. Even the Dominion gunships had stopped their attack, hovering in place as if they too were trying to understand what had just happened. Edievath stood frozen on the temple roof, her four arms still raised toward the sky, her old hearts beating so fast she thought they might bursting all her years of faith. She had never truly expected an answer. She lowered her arms slowly, her mind struggling to process what she had witnessed. And then she did something that surprised even herself. She began to climb down from the temple. Her assistant, a young priest named Kethful, met her at the bottom with panic in his dark eyes. "High Priestess, what are you doing? We must hide. The Dominion will surely investigate." Yavath looked at him, and for the first time in 3 years, there was something other than despair in her expression. "Something fell from the sky," she said. "Something that came when I called, and I will not hide from it. I will not let fear stop me from seeing what the heavens have sent." Kethful stared at her as if she had lost her mind. But he did not try to stop her as she walked toward the temple gates. Other Vethkai saw her going, refugees who had fled to the temple for safety, and one by one they began to follow her. Because the High Priestess was walking toward something instead of away from it. And that was more than anyone else had done in 3 years. They formed a small procession as they left the burning city behind and climbed into the hills. Following the smoke that rose from the impact city, Avath did not know what she would find there. And part of her was terrified that it would be nothing. Just a piece of space debris that meant nothing at all. But another part of her, the part that had kept faith for 70 years, whispered that the myths were true heroes descended from above, and one of them had just arrived. Commander Elena Vasquez had made peace with death 11 days ago, and she was annoyed to discover that death had not accepted her offer. She had been serving aboard the UNSC frigate Relentless when a Dominion raider patrol had ambushed them near the Kepler boundary. And the battle had lasted exactly 7 minutes before the Relentless was torn apart by plasma fire. Elena had made it to an escape pod, along with 2 other crew members. But they had died from their wounds within the first 3 days. And she had been alone in the darkness ever since her emergency beacon had broadcast continuously. But no one had answered, and her water had run out on day 8. And her food had run out on day 9. And she had spent the last 2 days drifting through the void, wondering if she would die of thirst or suffocation first. Then her pod's proximity alarms had started screaming, and she had looked out the tiny window to see a planet rushing toward her. A planet that was not on any map she had ever seen. And before she could even try to adjust her trajectory, she had hit the atmosphere. The crash landing was violent in ways that Elena could barely remember afterward. A blur of fire and impact, and the sound of metal tearing. And when she finally opened her eyes, she was lying in a crater surrounded by twisted debris, and her head was bleeding badly. She pushed herself up slowly, every muscle in her body screaming in protest. And she looked around at an alien world, painted in shades of purple and gold. The air was breathable, which was lucky, and the gravity was lighter than Earth's, which was also lucky, and there was a group of alien creatures approaching her, which might or might not be lucky, depending on what they wanted. Elena reached for her sidearm, but found only an empty holster, the weapon lost somewhere in the crash. And so she simply stood there swaying slightly as the aliens drew closer. They were tall and covered in scales that seemed to shimmer with different colors. And they had 4 arms each, and their eyes were large and dark, and currently filled with what looked like a mixture of fear and wonder. One of them stepped forward, an old female with silver scales who moved with the careful dignity of someone important. And she said something in a language Elena could not understand. Elena shook her head to show she did not comprehend, and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through her skull. "I do not know what you are saying," she said, her voice rough from days without water. "But I really hope you are friendly because I have had a very bad week." The aliens seemed startled by her voice, chattering among themselves in their musical language. And the old female approached even closer until she was standing directly in front of Elena IV. Hands reached out and touched Elena's face gently, exploring the strange texture of her soft skin. And the alien's expression shifted to something that looked almost like Elena was about to ask what was happening when she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. Engines. The heavy engines of military aircraft. She looked up and saw 3 gunships approaching from the direction of the burning glow on the horizon. And they were not human ships. They were the same angular black vessels that had destroyed the relentless Dominion. She breathed. And even though the aliens could not understand her words, they understood her tone. Panic spread through the group like wildfire. The Vethkai scattering toward the rocks and trees for cover. And Elena found herself standing alone in the crater. As the gunships landed nearby, 3 soldiers emerged from the lead ship. Massive creatures in heavy armor that Elena recognized as Krethvin, the ruling species of the Dominion. And they carried weapons that could vaporize her where she stood. The lead soldier looked at Elena and laughed. A harsh barking sound that needed no translation. "What is this?" he said in broken Galactic common. "Another soft thing for the labor camps. She will not last a week." His companions laughed with him, and they began walking toward Elena with the casual confidence of predators who had never met anything they could not kill. Elena felt something shift inside her chest. She had spent 11 days dying in the dark, and she had lost her ship and her crew, and she had nothing left except the rage that had been building since the moment the Relentless exploded around her. Dominion soldiers saw a small, soft creature with no weapons and no armor, bleeding from her head, barely able to stand. They did not see a human. They did not understand what that meant. Lead soldier reached for Elena with one massive hand, probably intending to grab her by the throat. And Elena moved. 12 years of combat training took over, combined with reflexes honed on a world where everything wanted to kill you. And Elena ducked under the grab and drove her fist into the soldier's throat with every ounce of strength she possessed. The Krethven were large and strong and covered in natural armor. But they had not evolved on Earth, and they did not understand that humans were persistent predators who could run for days without stopping, or that human bones were dense enough to be used as weapons, or that human muscles could generate enough force to crack stone. The soldier staggered back, choking, and Elena did not give him time to recover. She grabbed his arm and used his own momentum to throw him into his companion. And when the 3rd soldier raised his weapon, she was already inside his guard, her elbow smashing into the gap between his helmet and his chest plate. Fight lasted less than 30 seconds. When it was over, Elena stood over 3 broken bodies, breathing hard, her fists covered in purple blood, and her own red blood still dripping from the gash on her head. She looked up and saw the Vethkai watching her from their hiding places, their large dark eyes wide with something that went beyond shock. The old female with silver scales emerged slowly from behind a rock, and she walked toward Elena with trembling steps, and when she reached her, she fell to her knees. Elena did not understand the words the alien spoke, but she understood the tone. It was worship. "No," Elena said, shaking her head and wincing at the pain. No. I am not a god. I am just a soldier." "Please get up." But the other Vethkai were emerging now, all of them falling to their knees, all of them looking at Elena like she was something sacred. Elena stood in the crater of her crashed escape pod, surrounded by dead Dominion soldiers and kneeling aliens. And she realized that something had changed. The old female pointed toward the burning glow on the horizon and spoke again. And this time, Elena heard the question in her voice. Even without understanding the words, she looked toward the distant flames, toward the city that was being destroyed. And she thought about the 11 days she had spent dying in the dark, and the crew she had lost, and the countless worlds the Dominion had conquered. Elena Vasquez was stranded on an alien planet with no weapons and no backup and no way home. But she was alive. And she was angry, and these people needed help. She looked at the old female and nodded slowly. "Take me there," she said, pointing toward the burning city. "Take me to whoever is doing this." The alien seemed to understand. She rose to her feet and took Elena's hand in two of her own, and she began leading her toward the flames behind them. The other Vethkai followed, and as they walked, Elena could hear them whispering to each other in their musical language. The same word repeated over and over again. Kolvarinj did not know what it meant yet, but she would learn. 6 months had passed since Elena fell from the sky, and the Dominion was beginning to understand that something had gone terribly wrong on Vethkai. Primate had started small. A patrol that never returned here, a supply convoy that vanished there. Nothing that would normally concern an empire that controlled 100 star systems, but the incidents kept happening, and they kept getting worse. And the soldiers who managed to escape told stories that no one wanted to believe. They spoke of shadows that moved in the darkness, of four-armed creatures that had once cowered at the sight of a Dominion uniform, but now attacked without fear or hesitation, of a demon with soft skin and red blood who led them into battle and could not be killed no matter how many times she was wounded. Hi. Commander Drethkal read the reports in his office aboard the orbital station and felt an unfamiliar emotion stirring in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it as fear in the surface below. In the Temple of Descending Light, Elena Vasquez was teaching her students how to kill. "Your enemy expects you to be weak," she said, standing in the center of the temple courtyard while 100 Vethkai warriors watched her with absolute attention. They have conquered 12 species and never faced real resistance. And that is their greatest weakness. She had learned their language over the past months, or at least enough of it to communicate. And she had learned their names and their stories and their pain. The old female with silver scales was called Yaveth, and she was the spiritual leader of this world. And she had become something like a mother to Elena in the absence of everything else. The young priest who had tried to stop Yaveth from investigating the crash was called Kethful, and he had become Elena's first student and then her first lieutenant. And now he stood beside her as she trained the others. "You have advantages they do not understand," Elena continued, walking among her students. "You have 4 arms where they have 2. You can see in darkness where they need lights. And you can communicate through your mental bond without making any sound." The Vethkai had what they called the Soul Link, a low-level telepathic connection that let them share emotions and simple concepts with each other. And Elena had spent weeks figuring out how to use it for military coordination. "When we attack," she said, "we attack together, and we attack from everywhere. And we never give them time to respond." She stopped in front of a young Vethkai female named Severa, who had lost her entire family to the Dominion labor camps and had been the first to volunteer when Elena asked for warriors. "Show me what you have learned," Elena said. Severa nodded and picked up her staff, a simple wooden weapon that the Vethkai used in their religious ceremonies. And she attacked Elena with speed that would have been impossible 6 months ago. Elena blocked and countered and guided, never actually hurting her student but pushing her to move faster and think sharper. And when the exchange was over, both of them were breathing hard. "Good," Elena said. "Much better than last month." She turned to address the whole group. "Tomorrow night, we strike the mining facility at Kethver, the one that has been poisoning your eastern rivers. And if we succeed, we will have enough captured weapons to arm every fighter in the resistance." The Vethkai raised their staffs in unison, a gesture of commitment that they had developed over the months of training. And Elena felt pride swelling in her chest. These people had been victims for 3 years, broken and hopeless and waiting to die. And now they were warriors who believed they could win. She was not sure if that belief was justified. But she had learned that belief itself was a weapon after the training session ended. Elena walked through the temple to the room she had claimed as her quarters, and she found Yaveth waiting for her there. The old priestess looked at Elena with eyes that held both love and worry. "You push yourself too hard," Yaveth said. "You train all day and plan all night, and I do not think you have slept properly in weeks." Elena sat down on her simple bed and rubbed her face with her hands. "I cannot afford to sleep," she said. "Every day that passes is another day. The Dominion could decide to stop playing games and simply burn this world from orbit. And what good will you be to us if you collapse from exhaustion?" Elena did not have a good answer for Thaddeus, sat down beside her, and placed two of her hands on Elena's shoulders. "When you first arrived," the priestess said, "I thought you were a Kelvaran, a divine being sent to save us, and I expected you to perform miracles. I am sorry to disappoint," Elena said with a tired smile. "You do not understand," Yaveth replied. "I am not disappointed. I am amazed, because what you have done is so much more incredible than any miracle." She gestured toward the window, through which they could see the courtyard where the warriors were still practicing. "You are not a god. You are a mortal being of flesh and blood who gets tired and bleeds and makes mistakes. And yet you came here and decided to help us anyway. And you taught us to help ourselves." Elena looked at the old priestess and felt tears threatening to form in her eyes. "I did not have a choice," she said. "I could not just watch and do nothing." "That is exactly what makes you magnificent," Yaveth said. "You did have a choice. You could have hidden until you found a way off this world. You could have surrendered to the Dominion and hoped for mercy. You could have accepted that fighting was hopeless." She leaned forward and touched her forehead to Elena's, a Vatkai gesture of deep affection. "Instead, you chose to fight, not because you knew you would win, but because fighting was the right thing to do. And that choice has changed everything." Elena closed her eyes and let the tears fall. She had not cried since the Relentless was destroyed, had not allowed herself that weakness. But here in this moment with this alien woman who had become family, she finally let go. "I miss my home," she whispered. "I miss my people. I miss knowing that backup was coming if I got in trouble." "I know," Yaveth said. "But you are not alone. You have us now. And we will fight beside you until the end. Whatever that end looks like." Elena opened her eyes and looked at the priestess. "The end might be all of us dying. Then we will die as warriors instead of slaves," Yaveth said. "And that is more than we had before you came." Elena took a deep breath and wiped her face. "The attack tomorrow," she said. "I want you to stay here where it is safe." "Absolutely not," Yaveth replied with a smile. "I am old and I am slow, but I can still carry a weapon. And my people need to see that even their priestess is willing to fight." Elena wanted to argue, but she knew it would be pointless instead. She just nodded and squeezed the old woman's hands. "Then we fight together." "We fight together," Yaveth agreed. "And whatever happens tomorrow, know that you have already given us something the Dominion could never take away." "What is that?" "Hope," the priestess said. "You gave us hope, and that is worth more than all the weapons in the galaxy." Elena looked out the window at her warriors, at the people she had trained and grown to love, and she made a silent promise to whatever powers might be listening. She would get them through this, or she would die trying. 1 year after Elena crashed on Vethkai Prime, the Resistance controlled 3 continents, and the Dominion was losing soldiers faster than they could replace them. But Elena knew it was not enough. She stood on the roof of the Temple of Descending Light, looking up at the stars that had become so familiar over the past months, and she felt the weight of impossible mathematics pressing down on her shoulders. They had won every battle, taken every objective, freed thousands of Vethkai from labor camps, and turned them into fighters. But none of that mattered against orbital bombardment. The Dominion had been patient so far, treating the rebellion as a local problem to be solved with local resources. But Elena knew that patience would not last forever. Eventually, some commander would decide that the cost of fighting was too high, and the solution was simply to burn the planet from space. She needed to contact Earth. Problem was that Earth was hundreds of light years away, and the Vethkai had never developed technology capable of interstellar communication. And Elena's escape pod had been destroyed in the crash landing. But Elena had not survived 11 days drifting in space by accepting impossible situations. She had spent months gathering parts, salvaging components from destroyed Dominion equipment and her crashed pod and ancient Vethkai radio systems. And piece by piece, she had built something that might work. The device sat on the roof beside her now, a cobbled-together mess of alien and human technology that would probably only function once before burning out completely. Cavill approached from the stairs, his scales flickering with the green of worry. "The scouts have returned," he said. "The Dominion is assembling a fleet in orbit, at least 30 ships, more than we have ever seen." Elena felt her stomach drop. How long? 2 days, maybe 3, before they are ready to attack. She looked at her communication device and then back at the stars. "It does not matter," she said. "Even if I can send a signal, even if someone receives it, they could never get here in 2 days. Then why are you doing this?" Elena thought about the question for a long moment. "Because giving up is not an option," she finally said. "Because there might be other ships closer than Earth. Because maybe the signal will reach someone who can at least tell my people what happened here." She knelt down beside the device and began making final adjustments. "And because if we are going to die, I want the galaxy to know that we fought." Keffel watched her work in silence for a while, then spoke again. "You have changed since you came here," he said. "When you first arrived, you were angry. So angry that it burned in your eyes like fire. But now you are different." "What am I now?" "Determined," he said. "Calm, focused. You fight because you believe in what you are fighting for, not because you want revenge." Elena paused and looked at him. "Your people changed me," she said. "Yaveth changed me. You changed me. I came here as a soldier who had lost everything, and you gave me something new to believe in." She returned to her work. "Whatever happens in the next few days, I need you to know that I am proud of what we built together. This resistance, this army. It is something special. We could not have done it without you." "That is not true," Elena said. "I showed you how to fight, but the courage was always yours. I just helped you find it." She made one final connection, and the device hummed to life, a low vibration that she could feel in her bones. "It is ready," she said. "I do not know if it will work. I do not know if anyone will hear it. But I have to try." She pressed the transmission button and spoke into the makeshift microphone. "This is Commander Elena Vasquez, United Nations Space Command Navy, to any human vessel. I am on a planet called Vethkai Prime. Coordinates attached to this transmission." She took a breath and continued. "The Dominion is here. They have been enslaving the local population for years. But there is a resistance now, and we have been fighting. We need extraction and reinforcements. These people are worth saving." She looked at Kethval. At the temple below, where hundreds of warriors were preparing for what they all knew might be their last battle. "I do not know if anyone will receive this message. But if you do, please help us. We cannot hold out forever." Vasquez out. She released the button and the device sputtered and died, smoke rising from several components that had burned out during the transmission. "Is that it?" Kethval asked. "That is it," Elena said. "Now we wait and prepare for the worst." They waited. The Dominion fleet continued to gather, growing larger every day. And Elena organized her warriors into defensive positions around the temple and the surrounding city. Scythe led prayers for deliverance. The same prayers her people had been saying for thousands of years. And for the first time since Elena arrived, there were no words of reassurance she could offer on the third night. Elena stood on the temple roof again, looking up at the stars and wondering if her signal had reached anyone. The Dominion fleet had begun to move, 30 warships descending toward the planet in formation. And Elena knew that this was the end. She had gathered her commanders, given her final orders, told them to fight for every inch of ground and make the enemy pay for every step. But she knew it would not be enough. She closed her eyes and thought about Earth, about her family, about the life she had left behind. And she whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening when she opened her eyes. The sky was full of light. For a moment she thought the bombardment had begun. But then she realized that the light was not coming from the Dominion fleet. It was coming from somewhere else. Ships dropped out of warp directly above her. Dozens of them. Vessels that bore the blue and gold insignia of the United Nations Space Command. And Elena felt her heart stop in her chest. The broadcast that overrode every frequency on the planet was calm and professional, and it was the most beautiful thing Elena had ever heard. Dominion forces? This is Admiral Chun of the UNSC Unconquerable. You have 20 minutes to withdraw from Vethkai Prime. This is not a negotiation. Elena stood frozen on the rooftop, unable to move, unable to breathe. Watching as her people filled the sky, the Dominion did not withdraw. The battle that followed lasted 6 hours. And Elena watched every moment of it from her position on the temple roof, surrounded by Vethkai warriors who had never seen anything like it human. Warships moved with precision and power that made the Dominion vessels look clumsy, firing weapons that tore through enemy shields like paper, coordinating with each other in patterns that seemed almost like a dance. The Dominion fleet lasted 4 hours before the survivors fled into warp, leaving behind the burning wreckage of 24 ships. When the first human dropship landed in the temple courtyard, Elena was there to meet it. Marines poured out in full combat gear, securing the perimeter with practiced efficiency, and medics rushed toward wounded Vethkai without being asked. A tall woman in an admiral's uniform stepped out of the dropship and walked toward Elena. Commander Vasquez, she said. I am Admiral Chun. We received your signal. Elena tried to speak, but no words came out. Admiral Chun smiled. You look surprised. You came. Elena finally managed. I sent a message into the dark, and you actually came. Of course we came, the Admiral said. You are one of ours, and more importantly, you told us these people needed help. She looked around at the Vethkai, who were emerging from the temple, staring at the human soldiers with the same awe they had shown Elena when she first arrived. Looks like you did pretty well on your own, Admiral Chun said. But the cavalry is here now. Elena felt tears streaming down her face, and she did not try to stop them. They need to know, she said. My people, the Vethkai, they need to know that you came for all of us, not just for me. Admiral Chun nodded and turned to the gathered crowd. People of Vethkai Prime, she said, her voice carrying across the courtyard. Humanity has heard your struggle, and we have come to stand with you from this day forward. You are under our protection. The Vethkai did not understand the words, but they understood the meaning. Yavith pushed through the crowd and stood before the Admiral. Her old scales wet with tears, she looked at Elena and spoke in her own language. You called to the stars, she said. And the stars answered. Elena took her hand. They came for all of us, she replied, just like I always hoped they would. 5 years had passed since the liberation of Vethkai Prime, and the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The story of Commander Elena Vasquez had spread to every corner of known space, carried by traders and refugees and rebels who whispered about the soft-skinned warrior who had fallen from the sky and taught an entire species to fight other conquered worlds. Had heard the story and taken courage from it. rising up against the Dominion with the same fierce determination that the Vethkai had shown. And humanity had answered every call for help. The Dominion was crumbling, its empire fracturing as species after species broke free. And the rulers, who had once believed themselves invincible, now lived in constant fear. Elena had returned to active duty with the UNSC, promoted twice for her actions on Vethkai Prime. But she never forgot the world that had become her second home. She returned whenever she could, sometimes for official diplomatic visits and sometimes simply because she missed the people who had become her family. Today was one of those visits. Elena's shuttle descended through the purple gold sky toward the capital city, which had been rebuilt in the years since the liberation. And she could see crowds gathering below. AFT was waiting for her at the landing pad, older now but still strong, her silver scales gleaming in the light of the twin suns. "You came back," the priestess said, embracing Elena with all four arms. "I always come back," Elena replied. "This place is part of me now." They walked together through the streets toward the Temple of Descending Light. And Elena noticed that the city had changed since her last visit. There were new buildings everywhere, schools and hospitals and training centers, and many of them bore plaques with human writing alongside Vethkai symbols. "Your people have been helping us rebuild," Yavith said. "Teachers and doctors and engineers. They come from Earth and stay for months at a time." "That sounds like humanity," Elena said with a smile. "We cannot resist a good project." They reached the temple, and Elena stopped in her tracks. The main hall had been transformed, its ancient murals repainted and expanded. And in the center of the largest wall was a new image that had not been there before. It showed a figure falling from the sky, wrapped in fire and light. But it was not the divine being of the old myths. It was a human woman with dark hair and determined eyes, reaching out toward the Vethkai below. "What is this?" Elena breathed. "It is you," Yavith said simply, "or rather, it is what you represent. We have a new myth now." She led Elena closer to the mural and began to explain. "We still tell our children about the Kelvaran, about heroes who descend from above, but we tell the story differently now." She pointed to the figure in the painting. "We tell them that the heroes are not gods. They are not divine beings with unlimited power who can solve all our problems with a wave of their hand." She turned to look at Elena. "We tell them that the heroes are simply human, mortal beings who get tired and bleed and make mistakes. And that makes them so much more magnificent than any god could ever be." Elena felt tears forming in her eyes. "I do not understand. You could have passed us by," Yavith said. "You could have hidden until you found a way home. You could have decided that our problems were not your concern." She pressed one of her hands against Elena's chest, over her heart. "Instead, you chose to fight for us, not because you were compelled by some divine purpose, but because you saw people suffering and decided you could not look away." The priestess smiled. "That choice is the most sacred thing I have ever known." They stood in silence for a long moment. And then Elena spoke. "When I first crashed here, I was angry and broken, and I had given up on everything. Your people gave me something to believe in again, and you gave us the same," Yavith replied. "We saved each other." They walked out onto the temple balcony, looking over the city that had risen from the ashes of destruction. Children were playing in the streets below, Vethkai and human children together, chasing each other and laughing in both languages. "There is something else I must tell you," Yavith said. "Something that has been happening across our world." Elena looked at her curiously. "When we tell the new myth to our children," the priestess continued, "when we tell them about the soft-skinned hero who chose to fight, many of them ask a question that the old myths never inspired." "What question?" Yavith smiled. "They ask how they can be like you, how they can be the ones who descend from above to help others, how they can choose to fight for people who cannot fight for themselves." She gestured toward a group of young Vethkai who were practicing combat drills in a nearby courtyard. Guided by human trainers. "We are building a fleet," she said. "Small ships for now. But we are learning to travel between the stars. And when we are ready, we will join humanity in answering the calls for help that come from other worlds." Elena stared at her in amazement. "You are building a rescue force. We are building a legacy," Yavith corrected. "Your legacy, the legacy of a woman who fell from the sky and showed us that heroes are not born. They are made through choices." She took Elena's hand. "You did not just save our world. You changed how we see ourselves. We are no longer a species that waits for salvation. We are a species that brings salvation to others." Elena looked at the young warriors training below, at the children playing together, at the rebuilt city that stretched to the horizon. She thought about the relentless and the crew she had lost, about the 11 days drifting alone in the dark, about the moment she had decided to fight for people she did not even know, every choice she had made, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt and fear and pain. It had all led to this world transformed, a species awakened, a new chapter in the story of the galaxy. "I never expected any of this," she said quietly. "That is because you were not thinking about yourself," Yavith replied. "You were thinking about us, and that is exactly why we love you." The twin suns were setting now, painting the sky in shades of deep purple and brilliant gold. And Elena stood on the temple balcony with the woman who had become her mother. Far below, a child looked up and pointed at her, saying something to his friends that made them all turn and wave. Elena waved back. "The myths told of heroes descending from above," Yavith said softly. "And for 10,000 generations we waited for them to appear." She looked at Elena with tears glistening in her dark eyes. "We never imagined that when they finally came, they would be so wonderfully, beautifully human." Elena pulled the old priestess into an embrace and held her tight. She had fallen from the sky as a broken soldier with nothing left to lose. She had become something more, something that would echo through the ages. Not a god, not a divine being, not some mythological figure of unlimited power, just a human who had chosen to help, and somehow, that was enough. The story would be told for generations to come. On Vethkai Prime and on 100 other worlds. Passed from parent to child and teacher to student, it would inspire countless acts of courage. Countless choices to stand up for those who could not stand for themselves. Countless ordinary beings deciding to become heroes, and at the heart of every telling, there would be a simple truth that Elena had taught them all: you do not need to be a god to change the world. You just need to be brave enough to try.